The American Market Revolution. Let's start by taking a look at early American farming, which could be considered subsistence farming. In other words, farmers were growing what they and their family could consume. Most of what they produced on the farm was consumed by that household. Some might have been traded locally, and they might have purchased some goods locally, but most of what the people on the farm consumed, they produced themselves food and some objects like clothing, for example. Also, a lot of trade was done on the local level exclusively, and sometimes that's even done through a barter system where money might not be used. You might exchange goods and services for other goods and services that you want. After the War of 1812, we're going to see a lot more commercial farming nationwide, not just on the tobacco farms in the Chesapeake region, but throughout the nation. We're going to see farmers growing one crop and the farmers actually consuming very little of that crop, most of the crop being traded. After the War of 1812, there is a significant boom in our economy. And we're going to see trade to other regions and even trade to other countries really start to increase. And a lot of that trade is a result of credit and paper money being used more. So, why did these changes take place? Well, good land is widely available. With the British and the Native American threat no longer present in the Midwest, territories like Michigan and Wisconsin and Illinois are now more open to settlement. And the Mississippi Territory is open to settlement. The Louisiana Territory is out there waiting to be developed. This new land is unfarmed, meaning it is still nutrient rich. It hasn't had the vitamins and minerals that plants need sucked out of it by previous generations of crops. In other words, farmers could move west and get more farmland. We also see a change in sales. Farmers used to only sell their goods locally. Now, however, due to improvements in the transportation system, like the canal system we see here in upstate New York, now farmers can trade over much longer distances. And as a result, we're going to see a growing class of middlemen who help with this trade. Even with these middlemen, trade still becomes cheaper because of the improvements in transportation. In 1815, we have some regional specialization. In the north, wheat is a popular crop, and the popular area for growing wheat is Pennsylvania and New York. But by 1840, that has shifted to Ohio and Indiana and Illinois. Sheep are being produced in New England, and that's the main use of farmland in New England by 1840. In the Chesapeake region, it's still going to be tobacco, but in South Carolina, they're producing rice. In Louisiana, they're producing sugar. And now, through most of the lower South, cotton is being produced in large numbers. This regional specialization is going to add to the networks of trade that are established. Let's take a moment and talk about cotton. Why is cotton being grown so much? Well, there is demand for cotton, and that has a lot to do with Great Britain and their industrial revolution and their textile industry needing more cotton. Eventually, New England is going to start a textile industry of their own, further increasing demand on cotton. We should also mention the cotton gin, invented in 1793 by Eli Whitney. And what that significantly did was cut labor costs. It made it so that you could grow long staple cotton throughout the South and still clean it efficiently enough to make some money. Another reason why cotton is becoming so popular at this time is because of that available land in what we used to call the Old Southwest, Alabama and Mississippi, what's called the Mississippi Territory on this map. Also, even down into Louisiana. We know that this is where a lot of the cotton is produced because we can look at the bales of cotton that came through New Orleans. In 1816, it was less than 50,000, but by 1840, it's almost 1 million bales of cotton. That's a significant increase from those farmers in that area. Another reason is because of slave labor that keeps labor costs extremely low, giving cotton farmers more land or more money to buy land. We also know that the South had good rivers for shipping, and the increased use of steamboats makes that even easier to go up and down the river. So by the entire South from 1815 to 1840, cotton production triples in that time. We mentioned a moment ago the middlemen that emerged. These men would meet farmers in towns, and they would trade whatever the farmer had produced or grown for clothing or manufactured goods, things maybe the farmer couldn't produce on his own. They would then take them from town to a larger city like St. Louis or Cincinnati or Pittsburgh. And these cities would serve as the final stop before the farmer's produce arrived in places like Philadelphia or New York or New Orleans to be shipped somewhere else maybe. So in other words, this system relied heavily on credit. You see, a farmer in Delaware might sell wheat to a merchant in Columbus, and he's going to receive payment for that as well as payment in advance for next year's crop. The Columbus merchant is going to sell it to a merchant in Cincinnati, and he's going to get payment as well as an advance for the next year. He's going to sell it to a merchant in Philadelphia who's going to get payment as well as an advance for the wheat next year, who's going to sell it to a baker in Philadelphia who's going to pay that merchant for the wheat as well as give him an advance for next year. Even with all this, it is still more profitable than selling locally. We're talking about a market revolution. This is not an industrial revolution, but industrialization is starting to happen. Before the market revolution, before rapid industrial or large-scale industrialization, American industry, if we could call it that, used what's called the putting out system. And that's where investors, people with money, bought raw materials and then provided those raw materials to farm families. And those farm families would do simple steps like turning wool into thread, turning thread into cloth, turning cloth into clothing. They would do that in their downtime on the farm. They would do one or maybe two steps in the process and then sell it back to the investor, and the investor would pay them for their work as well. This is important because this does not lead to any significant change in society. These people are still farmers. They're still working on the farm. They're just generating a little extra money on the side. The other place where some manufactured goods were produced before industrialization is in artisans' workshops, where a master craftsman or maybe his apprentices might create something that was more complicated and intricate and even personalized. Eventually, those artisans are going to become business owners, and the journeymen that they employed just become regular workers. And this is a direct result of the growing market for low-priced goods. When we can sell to the whole nation, people are really trying to get the goods that are the lowest possible price. So the idea of personalized manufactured goods, the idea of extremely high quality craftsman-like made goods is replaced with an emphasis on speed, with an emphasis on quantity, and with an emphasis on standardization, making all the goods look the same. This is first seen in the textile industry that develops in America first in New England. And the innovation that they have there is that they take the process of spinning wool into thread and the process of turning thread into cloth using a power loom, they take all that and they put it under one building. And the first place this happens in America is in Lowell, Massachusetts. And the Lowell factory normally employed unmarried women as employees because they were happy to just have a job. They're rather content at first until conditions start to get bad in the 1830s and 1840s, and then there are some upset workers protesting even. In New England in 1824, 90% of the textiles were made at home. But by 1832, just 8 years later, that had dropped to 50%. We have not undergone an industrial revolution yet, but New England has become the first manufacturing area in the United States. And industrialization is on the rise as well. It used to be that if you had money, if you had extra money that you wanted to invest, the place to invest that money is in merchant companies, is in shipping, because that offered the best possibility for return. However, in the 1820s and 1830s, the new place to invest your money, the place that offers the best possible return, is to invest in factories, which means that there are now many Americans that are in favor of a protective tariff, which will help American manufacturing. Not just those, not just maybe a few people who own the business, but all the investors. Other industries followed after the textile industry. We have the iron industry really getting started in Pennsylvania. We have the weapons industry really benefiting from the ideas of mass production and one of Eli Whitney's other innovations, and that is interchangeable parts. In the West, we even have some industry with mills and slaughterhouses and tanneries and even large distilleries to convert corn and rye and barley into liquor. Again, I want to emphasize this is not an industrial revolution. In 1840, less than 10% of Americans worked in factories, and over 60% worked on the farm. What we've been talking about is called the market revolution, and that was a major change in distribution. We go from trading locally to now trading regionally. We trade to the rest of the nation even. This has not been a change in production. This does create some beneficiaries and victims, because now when we have economic problems, they become national economic depressions and panics, as they called them in the 1830s. And as a result, at the national level, people are more receptive to talks about reforming the economy, making changes. And people are more receptive to talks against big money and big industry, because these things affect the nation, not just people in one area. But again, it's important to emphasize this has not been an industrial revolution. We do not see this scene in 1840. We do not see this scene very much prior to the Civil War. In fact, what we normally see is this prior to the Civil War, because we are still an agrarian society. Also, we have not undergone a period of urbanization yet. American cities were still very small, and only about 7% of the population lived in the cities. And those cities mainly served as depots for international trade.